The wind howled through the pine trees as Marcus stood at the window of his grandfather's cabin, watching the snow begin to fall. Tomorrow he would marry a woman he'd never met. His grandfather's will had been clear: inherit the mountain estate and the family fortune, but only if he married within the year. The layer had found Elena, a woman from a distant village who needed money for her sister's medical treatment. It was a transaction, nothing more. Marcus had accepted his fate with the same cold resignation he'd felt since losing his parents in the avalanche that nearly destroyed this very cabin. 15 years ago, Elena arrived at sunset, her dark hair dusted with snowflakes, carrying a single worn suitcase. She didn't smile when they met, just extended her hand with quiet dignity. Marcus showed her to her room, explained the arrangement in clinical terms, and retreated to his study. He'd spent years alone on this mountain, convincing himself he preferred solitude to the risk of loving and losing again. This marriage would change nothing, he told himself. They would live as strangers sharing a house. But Elena was not what he expected. The next morning he found her in the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows she'd cleaned until they sparkled. The smell of fresh bread filled the air for the first time since his grandmother died. When he entered, she looked up, flour on her cheek, and said simply, "Everyone deserves a warm breakfast, even in a cold arrangement." Something in her eyes, a sadness that mirrored his own, made him pause before retreating to his workshop. Days turned to weeks, and Elena moved through the cabin like a gentle thaw. She never asked him to talk, never demanded affection or companionship. Instead, she left small traces of warmth, his favorite tea waiting in the morning, the fire built before he woke, wildflowers in a jar on the table even as winter raged outside. She hummed old songs while cooking, melodies that reminded him of his mother. Marcus found himself lingering in doorways, watching her, feeling something crack in the ice around his heart. One evening he found her crying at the kitchen table, a letter crumpled in her hand. Her sister's condition had worsened. The money wasn't enough. Elena looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "I'm sorry. I know this isn't part of our agreement. I'll compose myself." But Marcus sat down across from her for the first time. He reached across the table and took her hand, startled by how small and cold it felt in his. "Tell me about her," he said quietly, and Elena did. She spoke of Sophia, her younger sister, who painted beautiful pictures despite her illness, who dreamed of seeing the ocean, who made everyone around her laugh. As Elena talked, Marcus saw his own grief reflected in her love for someone she might lose. He understood then that they were both prisoners of fear, both trying to protect themselves from more pain by refusing to truly live. That night he made a decision that terrified him. The next morning Marcus drove Elena down the mountain to the city. He'd made calls, used connections he'd ignored for years, and arranged for Sophia to see the best specialists in the country. When Elena realized what he'd done, she turned to him with disbelief. "Why?" she asked. "This wasn't part of our deal. You don't even know us." Marcus kept his eyes on the snowy road and said, "Because pretending not to care is exhausting. And because you've shown me that walls don't keep you safe, they just keep you alone." Sophia's treatment was successful. Spring came to the mountain, and with it Sophia herself, still weak but smiling, her paintings tucked under her arm. She set up an easel on the porch and painted the valley below, the snow melting into rivers of green and gold. Marcus watched Elena teaching her sister to bake bread, listened to their laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long, and felt something he thought he'd buried forever: hope. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and orange, Elena reached for his hand. "I came here thinking I was making a sacrifice," she said softly, "trading my freedom for my sister's life. But you've given me something I didn't know I'd lost. A home, a reason to believe in kindness again." Marcus turned to her, this woman who had slipped past every defense he'd built, and finally spoke the truth. "I prepared for a cold, loveless marriage. I thought I was protecting myself from more loss. But you taught me that love isn't something to fear. It's what makes us brave." When they married again, this time for real in the small chapel down the mountain, Sophia was there, painting the moment with tears in her eyes. Marcus stood beside Elena, no longer a man hiding from life, but someone ready to embrace it, with all its risks and all its beauty. The mountain that had been his prison became their sanctuary, filled with warmth, laughter, and the understanding that sometimes fate disguises its greatest gifts as obligations, waiting for us to be brave enough to recognize. Love, when it quietly, patiently changes everything forever.